Anne? Ah, ok, sorry.
Elle est en ligne.
Oui. Anne va nous parler de la prévention des produits de lutte antivectorielle sur 5 ans. Le prochain thème sera le partenariat de financement pour l'approvisionnement des moustiquaires imprégnés insecticides qui sera présenté
Good afternoon,
conjointement
everyone.
par
Hi, my name
Kate
is Anna Trett, and
de
I'm from
Fonds
the Vector
mondial
Control team.
après Ruth Against Malaria Foundation et Christine du GHSD. Le troisième thème sera présenté par Mathieu Mandy de IVCC. Le thème sera la compréhension du score de résistance aux dommages et son application. Je vous demande de rejoindre au podium. Christine? Christy?
I'm online.
Ok. La présentation, le diapo. Anne, la parole est à vous. Merci.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, my name is Anna Trett, and I'm from the Vector Control team at Clinton Health Access Initiative. And I've today been asked to present on our latest iteration of the Global Malaria Commodities Forecasting project for Vector Control. And this was published back in December. I'm just pre-recording this, but I'll be available online for the Q&A session that follows this hour. So I'm sure a lot of you in the room are already familiar, but for those of you who are not familiar with this project, we publish these forecasts every year, and they include commodities for malaria, including case management, and also vector control commodities. And I'll be sharing the link to the dashboard within the chat right after the presentation. So those of you in the room who are interested can go have a look at the interactive dashboard that we have hosted on the RBM website. And just to give some context, this forecast is really meant to provide a general consensus of how we can anticipate procurements to look over the short term and longer term in terms of the malaria vector control markets. We're not trying to predict the future, we're merely trying to offer what a consensus view is looking like, and we hope that that can assist with manufacturers in their longer term decision making. So this is where we are, and this is one of our major inputs into the forecasting project, because we're hoping to forecast ITN shipment data. And as you can see, we've shifted away from the standard pyrethroid bed nets. Those have been replaced by the PBO nets, and we've seen an even bigger switch to those dual AI chlorphenapir bed nets. Now we do have the final 2025 ITN data now, but as I mentioned, this forecast was published back in early December. So these slides reflect the information and insight that we had up until early December last year. So that's why the data is incomplete for 2025. So for our ITN procurement forecast, a quick note on the projections and the projected number of years. We adopted a 5-year forecast with this year's iteration rather than a 10-year forecast. We chose to do this because we saw a lot of uncertainty beyond 2029, in particular around funding for vector control, commodities, and malaria financing in general. And we found any forecast that went beyond a 5-year projection was less reliable and really less useful for decision making in line with donor replenishment cycles. And also this is the feedback that we've been hearing, and therefore reflects how the forecasting project will look moving forward. So there's a lot on this slide, and I just want to highlight each of the steps quite briefly, but I can answer questions during the Q&A as well if there's any questions around the methodology specifically. But essentially, for the first 2 years of the forecast, we were able to gather good insight and procurement data to fulfill ITN volumes that were anticipated. Beyond 2026, it becomes a lot more complicated, and we needed to generate quite big assumptions, and we had to generate some funding scenarios for GC8 in particular. So we did this by compiling as much data and information we could regarding USG funding levels, global fund contributions, but also thinking about GiveWell and AMF strategies within this time frame. So from those budgets from GC8, we were then able to generate some reduced malaria budgets for countries and make assumptions around how countries would then spend those reduced budgets. And one of our big assumptions in that part of the methods was how countries would reduce their non-intervention spend. So this includes anything related to not buying commodities. So it could include things like surveillance, training, HR, donor management, things like that. And then this gave us an idea of what ITN volumes countries would procure with those reduced budgets. And for the first time this year, we connected our ITN forecast with an epidemiological model to look at how potentially reduced ITN coverages were leading to increased cases, therefore increasing the case management budget and having then a knock-on effect on ITN budgets the following year. So we accounted for that in steps 4 and 5. And then the final step 6 is really looking at those reduced volume of nets, but reducing the volume of nets that were distributed potentially through mass campaigns, assuming due to funding constraints that the potential increase in continuous distribution channels. We also allocated small proportions of ITN budgets to spatial emanators, and we allocated some volumes to a new dual AI bednet. This is a non-chlorphenapir bednet that has an anticipated market entry of 2029. So, as I mentioned in that second step, we did have to generate some global malaria funding assumptions. And again, this methodology was frozen early December 2025. And so this was correct as of the information that we had then. We know the outlook might be quite different right now, but this is the budget that we had generated just for this forecast and then these ITN outputs in particular. So what we were anticipating from the information we had at the time was around a 38% reduction in global malaria funding between GC7 and GC8. Again, this does not include the GiveWell and AMF funding. Those were incorporated into the methodology at a later stage. So in line with those budget reductions and in line with that reprioritization exercise that we have in the methodology of how countries might respond to budget reductions, this is our final ITN forecast. So that 38% reduction in global malaria funding is equating to around a 16% reduction in ITN volumes between the two grant cycles. And that is really driven by that reprioritization of country programs choosing to procure commodities over non-commodities. So we know that there was a high volume year in 2025 in terms of mass campaign activity. A big pattern that we saw was that the dual AI supply was actually exceeding the demand in terms of new manufacturers entering the market, but in line with these reduced budgets, there not being sufficient demand to be able to meet the volumes that are available. Clearly, there's a big pattern here, and that is the decline in the PBO volumes. From the information we currently have, we do anticipate the PBO market to diminish by 2028, and this is purely due to a more competitive dual AI market, and also in terms of really widespread pyrethroid resistance, and that guidance really shifting, which I think we've been hearing the last couple of days, guidance really shifting towards the uptake of the clofenapir dual AI bed nets. So this is the spend for ITNs that is connected to those ITN outputs. And again, the spend is falling in line with those budget reductions. And what we're seeing is that now the majority of the budget is shifting towards those newer and more expensive ITNs, which is good because they're more effective. But this is really in line with those resistance patterns and campaign timing as well. I've just superimposed the previous grant cycle as well within this graph here, and this is just to show that even though within this methodology we anticipated a much larger budget reduction between GC7 and GC8, because of that heavy country prioritization, we're still seeing a similar reduction in ITN volumes compared to GC6 and GC7. And again, this is the volumes associated with those budgets. The volumes are still reducing, but not as we might anticipate. So just to highlight a couple of key takeaways, and obviously the decline in ITN volumes is really worrying, but we wanted to highlight that according to the country level analysis, most high burden countries were able to maintain quite a significant proportion of their ITNs, and that's really in line with part of the methodology where we simulated that donors and funders would still then prioritize a lot of funding to those high burden countries. And that meant that a lot of ITN procurement within those countries was maintained. As well, in some high burden settings, with the epidemiological model that we implemented, we did see that even though we were reducing ITN coverage, some of them had low ITN use rates already. So it did not lead to substantial increases in malaria incidents, and therefore didn't lead to big budget impacts on the case management budget and therefore the
Recording
future ITN
stopped.
budget. Again, we're seeing that the dual ITNs are continuing to dominate the ITN market with at least 5 pre-qualified nets available, but again highlighting that the reduced demand for PBO nets continuing. So a second scenario that we developed, and this is not part of the forecast, but it's a hypothetical business as usual scenario, which we would say is useful for advocacy purposes, and that's it. But it's a business as usual scenario that just shows us how we can anticipate volumes potentially to look if the funding continued between GC7 and GC8. So this is a flat funding scenario. We do still see that the PBO volumes would reduce and no longer be within the market by 2028. That's just purely in line with the guidance, again, for dual AI bed nets and also widespread insecticide resistance. And what we're seeing is that market still being just dominated by by those dual AI chlorphenapyr bed nets. Again, this scenario does not take into account a lot of those other adjustments that were made, so the reprioritization exercise where countries needed to cut back on their non-intervention spend to make way for those commodities. This is not included within this, so that would be additional funding that would be required on top of the business as usual scenario funding. And again, we haven't impacted these volumes with spatial emanators. The assumption there is that, again, different funding would be made available. So it's quite an optimistic type of scenario. Again, this is the budget that's associated with those ITN volumes in line with the business as usual scenario. And so the budget to fill that funding gap will be an additional 300 million. So that was the ITN forecast, and I'll just spend some time now to go over the IRS procurement forecast. Since 2019, we have seen a decline in IRS volumes. We have seen market entry of new classes, which is great and really exciting to have new products available, but we still have seen volumes continue to decline. So a brief introduction to the methodology, because it's very different from the ITN forecast, which is very methodological and analytical. Due to the insecticides for IRS only being procured in quite a handful, a small number of countries, we're able to do a country-by-country assessment to look at what countries are interested and continuing to procure IRS. What do their insecticide rotations look like? What are we hearing from partners that are involved in IRS programs? Are they anticipated to continue? And what kind of volumes are being reserved for those programs? I just wanted to note here that within this forecast, we're not including domestically procured insecticides for IRS, and we're also not including any private sector finance procured IRS either. And we're also not able to include a lot of key countries for the IRS market. So in terms of Latin America and Asia, in particular India and Pakistan. So those are excluded from this forecast, and we know that they do procure large volumes. So again, the IRS forecast looks quite different this year. We're not doing a 5-year forecast. We've kept it to a short-term forecast only. We really did not see good certainty from partners or any data beyond 2027 for insecticides for IRS. So we made the decision to keep it as a short-term forecast, and this is really based on the information that we were able to gather during the analysis for this forecast. So these are our IRS volumes output for the forecast, which goes up until 2027. So we do have good visibility through 2026 on some of those planned procurements and government commitments to continue deploying IRS programs. A majority of these are confined to around 11 countries, and again, not including domestic financing or private sector volumes here. But we do see a big uptake in those new insecticide classes, which is great. And then the associated budget. So again, we do still see a decline in the budgets over time as well for IRS budgets. So reducing from around 39 million in 2025 down to 31 million in 2027. We do anticipate that countries will be looking at domestic funds, and we're really keen to hear from people how we could best incorporate those in upcoming iterations of the forecast. So some of those key takeaways, again, there's a downward trend with the budgets and those volumes, although we do see an uptake in the new classes within the IRAC 30 group. But we're really looking to get a little bit more visibility for the next forecast if we're able to forecast beyond 2028. But these are really directional, as it says, rather than predictive. So I'll stop there, and hopefully there's time for questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup à notre aide de Shai. Nous passons maintenant au thème suivant, qui est le partenariat de financement pour l'approvisionnement des moustiquaires imprégnés d'insecticides, qui sera présenté conjointement par Kate Kalensky de Fonds mondial, Ruth Etterley et Christy, qui sera en ligne de GHSD. Merci. La parole est à vous.
Thanks, everybody. Yes, so this is a joint presentation. I'm the only one here in person, but as just mentioned, we've got Christy from State Department online, and we've got Ruth from AMF online. We have, I think, about 20 minutes, and I will try to go quite fast because some of the other partners have probably more they want to say than I do. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Can I control the slides? Yes. Okay. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'll try. Okay. I think we're back in the chai slides. Here we go. Okay, so I've got 3 slides. Next slide, please. First of all, something where we stand on Grant Cycle 8 and the timelines. Then I'll tell you a bit about product procurement. And then about deployment guidance. And also just to flag that my colleague Anne-Sophie Brion from our procurement department is online, so she will answer any questions you guys have about procurement-specific questions. But I'm just going to do it all because it's quicker. So first of all, the final replenishment outcome has been announced and published online. I think I mentioned that on Monday. And there's 12.6 billion, and it's important to look at that in terms of how that compares to previous grant cycles. And as I said on Monday, it's similar to grant cycle 4 and 5. So the amount of money that was available annually during the kind of 2014 to 2019 period. So obviously big challenges around that because costs are higher, population at need is much higher. We're going to focus on 3 strategic shifts for the grant cycle, which again I've already mentioned, I'm not going to dwell on, but there's going to be even greater prioritization towards the least resourced and the highest burden areas. There's going to be a conversation that's less relevant, to be honest, for most malaria grant countries, but there is going to be accelerated transition towards the end of global fund financing or reduced global fund financing for countries in specific contexts, predominantly those with higher income. And there's going to be, again, more sharp focus on optimization of available resources. And I think, I come back to that on the 3rd slide, but I think the optimization word is very important for us all to keep in mind. It's not just about budget cutting, it's about making smart decisions about which budget pieces are most important, or which kind of operational approaches are the best way to achieve the outcomes you're trying to achieve. We heard a lot the other day about successful ways that programs have looked at things differently and reduced their operational budgets significantly. I think that is excellent, it's very important, but I think our challenge, all of us this year, and it would be good to discuss a bit during the meeting, is how do we make sure that those cuts have not impacted the outcomes? How do we make sure that they are new and better and more imaginative ways of doing things, more integrated ways of doing things, and cuts and savings that are really sensible and beneficial, as opposed to ones that we might need to be concerned about? So I do think we need to do a lot of rapid thinking together as to how we monitor the potential impact of all those budget cuts. Next slide, please. So product procurement, just a few updates from Anne-Sophie. So first of all, the new reference prices will be posted soon in March for nets, and there will be some price decreases. So that will help in the budgeting for grant cycle 8 to a certain extent. Lead times are now about 7 months from requisition placement. That's not a massive change from recently, but a big improvement on previously. Packaging, there's been some movement in the net packaging space, which many of you will be aware of. So it used to be for a long time that we could only procure dual AI nets in individual packaging, but now thanks to some discussions and with the UN bodies who give guidance for this kind of thing, that has changed. So ITNs can now be in bulk packaging with no individual bags for mass campaigns, but will still be in individual bags for routine. That is a standardized approach to make it a lot easier to continue with a very fast-moving pipeline. There are conversations we will have with countries who are concerned about that, but it does save a lot of money on waste management and is also a bit cheaper just in the product price itself. I do think we all need together to think about where do more high throughput continuous distribution mechanisms fit into this, and what's the right way of packaging nets for those kind of distributions, schools or higher throughput things. So I think, again, that's a moving space we need to keep thinking about. Accessories, 6 hooks and strings, but PRs can ask to not have those if they don't need them, because of course they come with a cost. And then no changes on this next bit. PRs can specify the type of ITN they want, dual AI, PBO, pyrethroid only. The size, although 2 specific sizes are the most common and recommended and have much better pricing, and color, white or blue, but they cannot specify the specific type of pyrethroid because the WHO guidance and the evidence base doesn't suggest that that makes a difference. The brand, the fabric type, or any customization. So those things can't be asked for. For fabric type, there is an ability to give some supporting evidence if there is a strong case, a very strong case, that fabric type affects durability or use. And appropriate products, in Grant Cycle 8, Global Fund won't be procuring ITNs, pyrethroid-only ITNs, in areas of pyrethroid resistance. So that's a shift that needs to happen still to a small extent. And chlorphenapir nets remain the best choice in most places. Next slide, please. So on deployment guidance, this is the information that's summarized from our info note. So you'll find that it's not online at the moment, but it will go back up again soon. Basically, for prevention, the goal is to try and maintain current coverage as far as possible, noting that case management, of course, is a priority, but that as soon as you scale back prevention, you're going to get more cases, more deaths, and the case management costs will increase, so getting the balance right is important. Acknowledging, though, that there's certain countries who are going to be in a situation of needing to try and look more carefully at their prevention coverage and maybe need to revisit the current coverage. But what we are seeing in conversations is some thinking about the vaccine, and we do want to emphasize the WHO recommendation there that the vaccine shouldn't be, or any other prevention tool, including SMC, shouldn't be used as a reason to scale back net deployment. The whole thing needs to be considered holistically, but vaccines are recommended on the assumption that they're going to be layered on top of a more holistic set of malaria interventions. Subnationally tailoring is going to be more and more important, and that's just not just about types of net where, but more about distribution approaches, frequency of distribution, channels. All of those, they don't need to be the same everywhere, and it probably won't be appropriate for them to be the same everywhere. So that will probably get a lot more varied than it has been previously. I need to speed up a bit. So in terms of priorities for the ITNs, I've said about the tailoring and the importance of revisiting that. So revisiting it subnationally and on a whole range of things: approaches, channels, frequency, types of coverage targets even. Of course, high and moderate burden areas are going to remain the highest priority, and the biological groups in particular within those. But we think it's important to look carefully at where those are, and if there are some areas where potentially you could pull back distribution if burden is very low, or if it's an urban area, for example, where you think use won't be high or uptake won't be high, or just that availability of case management is so good and access to case management is so good that that doesn't it isn't a priority. So we will be assuming that more programs will be considering excluding urban areas. SBCC is another important aspect to look at very, very carefully. So of course it remains important to make sure that people are using the nets that they have access to. But often use given access to nets is very good in many places. So it doesn't make sense to have a blanket SBCC strategy across the whole country. We would assume there would be an ability to consider where use is a concern and target SBC more carefully. And I think Marcy said it nicely last year that we can protect funding for SBCC if we're really carefully able to show that we are making informed decisions about what is really needed and where it's really needed and how it will be deployed. So being more targeted will help protect that money really, rather than have it questioned as a blanket thing. And then on optimization and integration, I think I said what I really wanted to say on the first slide, which is that we do need to see more efficient distributions. We do need to see reduction in operational budgets, and we've seen this year that a lot of things are possible in that space, but that we really want and encourage programs to be looking and reflecting on what the impact might be, and thinking about what can we learn from the grant site from the 2026, the 2026 campaigns that did have reduced budgets. What can we learn from those as to how we should design the budgets in Grant Cycle 8? We shouldn't just make a blanket decision that we made all those cuts, we'll have all the same cuts in Grant Cycle 8. Hopefully we will look at the experience and be able to say, some of those cuts were brilliant and we can even lean more into them, and some of them we're worried that they had some impact, so we will think about it again. I think this is a good year to have that kind of reflection. Digitalization remains really important to ensure that the efficiencies that we can have from that model can come and be used. And it also remains important to help build integration abilities as well. And then on population numbers, this is an important one we're seeing in conversation with a lot of countries. The ability to quantify the campaign appropriately and not have overinflation of commodity numbers is really important. So revisiting how targeted populations are calculated is something that I think needs a lot of reflection to make sure that it's not too generous, too conservative, or too too inflated. I'm sorry that took longer than I expected. I'm going to hand over to Christy, I think, who is next. Are you online, Christy? And I'm going to sit down.
I've lost the slides. Thanks. So my name is Christy Hershey. I'm a public health advisor with the President's Malaria Initiative at the Department of State. I am joined online by Allison Belenvere from our vector control team. So with that said, PMI is still very much in existence. With the closure of USAID, PMI moved from USAID to the Department of State, and we are part of the Global Health Security and Diplomacy Bureau. Next slide. So PMI, our procurement approach, I will say that the Department of State released in September 2025 the America First Global Health Strategy. Included in that is a direct mention of LLINs as a key commodity for malaria control. So PMI continues to use the GHSC PSM project as our procurement service agent to procure malaria commodities, including nets. So we are currently establishing our next procurement approach, after the PSM project is scheduled to end over the course of the next year and a half. So PSM did, on behalf of PMI, conduct a tender in late 2025 for net procurements covering 2026. So far, we have received orders for about 32 million nets. So any future tendering under PSM is still to be determined. Similarly, and you can tell from the first CHI presentation, the volumes beyond 2026 are still very much TBD. They are being determined as part of the MOU implementation planning process. This is a new process under State Department. This will replace the MOPs, the Malaria Operational Plans, many of you are used to seeing. And these MOUs are being signed between the U.S. government and partner governments. And through that implementation planning process and operational planning process, the mechanisms, the commodities, and the dollar values will all be worked out. Next slide. So PMI through PSM, we procure white nets in 4 standard sizes shown here. We do not procure accessories or allow for, country, brand or logo customization on the bags. We will procure them in individual or bulk packaged LLINs. Similar to Global Fund, we are not allowing for material or brand preferences during sourcing. So any deviation from the above, standard specs do require approval from GHSD, from PMI, during the procurement process. Next slide. So with our lead times, our single pyrethroid lead times, 41 weeks, 45 weeks for PBO, and then 58 weeks for the chlorphenapyr dual AI nets from the time the requisition is entered into the system to delivery in country. Lead times are subject to market availability during the actual sourcing event. So the next slide shows the average prices PSM has received. So you can go to, thanks, from the last annual tendering process, and we have seen prices declining for all 3 net types. And the next slide, I believe this will be my last slide, is really going over the eligibility criteria for net procurements. We take into account, obviously, if where registration is required is a supplier registered in country, following WHO prequalification. Some countries do have a requirement for a particular language on the packaging. And then we're also considering market health considerations, the capacity of the supplier, the volumes they can produce, supply risk, and this is determined across commodity categories, so in this case the 3 net categories, trying to maintain a healthy market and determining the project setting, kind of the minimum number of suppliers that they plan to procure from, and then product appropriateness. So the weighted criteria, it's sort of in descending order of importance, but the cost, the supplier performance, quality management system, and the RD score, and I'll get back to the RD score in a moment. American economic benefit. This is a new criteria that has been added. We recognize none of these net manufacturers are considered a U.S.-based company, but they do some work in the United States. They do work with other companies in the United States, and that is taken into account in the tendering and award criteria. Regional supply chain resilience, which does capture local manufacturing, and then innovation. So when it comes to the RD score, we were asked to specifically mention whether we included the RD score or not in the latest round of tendering, and PMI did. So in the previous 2 years ago, we asked suppliers if they have RD scores, what they are doing to measure the RD score, to get this validated, and so that it was just informational. However, in the tender that was, at the end of 2025 to inform this year's procurements, we did include weighted RD score in the points allocated for this weighting for the award criteria. And as I mentioned, this is all managed by the PSM project, not directly by PMI, but we do work on the criteria ahead of time with them. So for the RD score, suppliers were asked to provide the RD score and external validation of the RD score, and additional points were given for RD scores over 50. So thank you, and we will be available for questions.
Merci Christy. Nous allons maintenant passer la parole à Monsieur Mathieu Mandy.
Hello?
Oui, oui.
Hi, I'm gonna.
Ruth?
Oh, we can.
Oui.
Hi.
Merci.
Great. Let me go ahead. I'm Ruth Hattersley. I'm going to be sharing a procurement update from the Against Malaria Foundation, AMF. Great. So as we've been hearing, and as we know, there are going to be significant funding gaps ahead of us, as there have been in the past. And mass campaigns are expected to be impacted just as they have in the past, but potentially even further. If we look back to GC7, 24 countries reported gaps in their planned mass campaigns, and the Against Malaria Foundation works with countries and partners to fund the highest priority of these gaps. So out of those 24, we worked with 7 countries over GC7 and have provided over 100 million nets. Now, when that's the context for our procurement, you can imagine it becomes very important to deploy the most cost-effective nets. So by doing that, it means nets can go further, covering more people, but also make sure they have the highest impact. So I'll get further into that later on. But I think it's the important thing is just to realize that this context we come at procurement with is always keeping this in mind, that we're trying to fill gaps. Next slide, please. So for this year, AMF is expecting to procure between 30 and 45 million nets. That's including both committed and distributions to be confirmed. And looking ahead to 27 to 29, we know, as others have said, there's still a lot of uncertainty at this point, but we'll be working closely with countries and with partners as they work to get a clearer picture on exactly where the gaps are going to be and how significant how significantly they'll affect mass campaigns. Now, even though we don't know exactly where our orders will be coming and exactly, we do know already that we're expecting our orders as a whole to move towards higher dual AI, as we've been discussing. That's been a trend we've seen over recent years and we expect to continue. And we are expecting to kind of get a clearer picture of this over the year. And we'll be running our tender likely at the end of 2026, possibly start of next year. And that will be where we'll be collecting information to enable us to procure nets for the next grant cycle. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in terms of the nets we're expecting to procure in the next coming years, this will broadly stay with the same criteria that we have been using recently and very much in line with Global Fund and PMI. So we have standardized our specifications increasingly, ordering only white nets, ordering 2 standard sizes, which are the same as the 2 recommended sizes by Global Fund, and only considering any variation from those under special cases with supporting evidence. We do still procure with AMF country labels, and those involve specific identifying features that are helpful both as anti-theft measures and used in our monitoring. We require GS1 labels to be produced in a way that means they're likely to be durable in use. And that's increasingly important as we're doing more and more scanning on distribution and in monitoring. And we found a real variety of results in terms of how well those nets have lasted in the field. We've seen good responses from suppliers so far in cases where they haven't necessarily been lasting well. We've seen suppliers respond well and come back with improvements for their next orders. Lastly, on packaging, as we fund mass campaigns only, we do not support individual packaging. And as Kate had mentioned, there's been some great work that's gone on in this area with thanks to those involved. That means that all nets are now available bulk packaged. Next slide, please. So if that's the kind of nets that AMF's procuring, how do we get to specific nets? Well, the process is very much involving country and co-funding partners. So we'll start with a discussion of what is expected to be needed. And bring all available evidence into a cost effectiveness review, primarily entomology and malaria burden, but considering other available information and cross-referencing that with the latest pricing and availability. So if there's an excellent net, but we're going to have to wait a year to get it, that's obviously going to affect our decision-making process. So we take all these inputs, we aim to estimate relative cost effectiveness, and we make a decision with the country and the co-funding partner to finalize for distribution. Now, the principles we keep in mind when we're going through that process, firstly, following the data. So if we're going to put additional funds into a more expensive net, we want to be sure that there's evidence it's worth it. That's typically meant that we've funded Clophenipa jewelii nets in higher resistance or higher burden areas first, and we constantly revisit that process and those criteria. We want to make sure that we're open to the latest evidence. We foster innovation, so we want to support new nets. We want to support new nets once they become available, with the idea that the whole market and the whole community will be much benefited by a greater variety of nets being available. We support data generation, including funding nets for studies, and have developed an increasing focus on net effectiveness and durability. And I think this is one that's really tough when we're in a time where, you know, there are funding cuts. We know everyone's looking for the ways to save funds. I think it could translate into just a nondescript cost pressure. And actually, that's when it makes it even more important to have clear metrics and clear methodologies for monitoring net durability. So we've been really, really glad to see the resistance to damage research, and we've benefited a lot from help of a number of partners helping us move forward and integrate that into our decisions. So we did include resistance to damage in our tender last year. We continue to ask suppliers for updates on resistance to damage results, and we are considering resistance to damage in our procurement, specifically weighted RD. That said, we are aware we want to make sure that where RD results are provided, that we're fairly comparing them. So we want to know that if a net has been tested in one place, if it was tested in another place, we'd get the same result. And that's something we're paying attention to. And again, we're grateful that there are other partners out there doing great work on this. Lastly, bioefficacy and chemical durability, harder to monitor, but this is something we don't want to forget about as we're in this time where we need nets to go the distance, and we want to make sure that we're putting the right incentives out there for the right nets to be developed in the future. So while physical durability has been included as standard in AMF's post-distribution monitoring for a long time, we're piloting additions to PDMs where we collect nets from the field, replace them, and look and test them. So we're in early stages with this, but I think we're very keen to make sure that we continue to learn and contribute to this field. Overall, we aim to bring this all together to help fill those gaps as effectively as possible. We're always keen to learn. We're always keen to see new evidence. So always glad to hear questions or to hear results and studies shared. Thanks very much.
Okay. Merci, Ruth. Oui. Voilà. OK. Mathias Mandy, c'est vous maintenant.
Merci. So while the presentation is showing up, my name is Mathias Mondi. I'm working for IVCC. And today I'm going to give this presentation on behalf of my colleagues who have really designed this system. So Julian Tangina and Frank Merchant. They are both online, and since I am today only, the messenger, if you have technical questions, I will bring them in because they are going to be the one who can help and answer this. I would like to thank also, the previous presenter, because they have provided me with a great segue related, to the durability of net and how this is included into the procurement process. So just as a reminder to everybody, as you all know, when we are developing BETNets are expected to last 3 years. I mean, this is really in the way they are being developed, in the way they are being tested. But what we are seeing and what we are witnessing is that when those BETNets are deployed in the field, actually their lifespan is a lot less than 3 years. So the diagram that you see on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, sorry, is actually the lifespan of the retention time of those nets per the individual country. This is very small, so I'm not expecting you to read, but if you are curious and to find out where Uganda is sitting on this slide, it is actually bang in the middle, and with a retention time of about 1.7, 1.8 years. So as I was saying, a net is expected to last 3 years, but in average, when we are studying it, it lasts 1.64 years, so just about a little bit more than half of the expected time. So what is influencing the durability of those net? Well, the first thing is that, I mean, this is directly linked to the condition of the net and being able to maintain a good condition of the net. Is this better? Yeah. So the condition of the net. So when I'm taking into consideration that when nets are being torn, they are going to be discarded by the user. And when nets are being damaged, then they are going to be used less and less consistently. So physical durability is something that is important, but up until now, and I'm really stressing this, up until now has been undervalued, and especially undervalued into the procurement process. But as you have heard, the previous presenter, this is something that is gradually changing, and now is being included more and more into the evaluation process by procurers. Next. So this is why we have developed this concept about resistance to damage, in short, RD score. This is a way to evaluate and to measure, the physical durability of nets before it reached the field. And so this is something that is important for everything else that I'm going to present, is that this is something that is being done at manufacturing level before it is being distributed. And it's going to provide a stakeholder with a number of metrics to inform procurement and deployment decision. Next. So here, when we are talking about how nets are going to be used, and here we are talking about the resistance evaluation within the normal use of net, meaning how they are resisting to seam failure, hole-in enlargement, snags, tears, and abrasion. It is not expected, to take into consideration things that are going to be outside of the normal use of the net. So misuse of the net, when rodents are going to eat through it, if you are cutting through it, if it takes fire, and so on and so forth. So, but it is important to realize that all in all, the majority of the damage is mechanical and is preventable. So here, there is, when we are talking about quantification of those responsibility, 63% of all ITN damages in the field are related to physical elements, such as snag, hole enlargement, and tears. So the way the RD score has been developed is that we have actually taken physical indicators that are part of the standard package and developed by WHO, requested by WHO to the different manufacturer. So here we are talking about 3 physical indicators: snag strength, bursting strength, hole enlargement resistance. So the combination of those different elements are going to create the RD score. Sorry, can you go back to the previous slide, please? The RD score is something that have evolved slightly through time, and it was really to try to get to an indicator that was as relevant as possible. Hence, for those who have followed, the development of this, there have been a number of elements that have been taken into consideration or outside of consideration. One thing that I would like to stress here is that there was a 4th indicator related to abrasion that finally have been removed from the RD score metrics because it was not sufficiently relevant. So why all this is so important? Well, first and foremost, because when we are looking at the evolution of BedNet through time, what we are realizing is that the level of durability is actually not increasing. So this diagram is showing you two things. One is that between the nets that were created, manufactured in 2013, and when the same nets were manufactured into 2020, I mean, the RD score has actually not changed. But it's also showing that outside of the variety of nets that are available into the marketplace, there is a great variety also of RD scores attached to them, ranging from somewhere around 20 to somewhere around slightly above 60. So this is a huge range that needs to be taken into consideration by people who are either procuring the nets or that are going to organize the deployment of them. What we are seeing is that there is no significant improvement of the RD score through time. So what does it mean, all this, and what are going to be the implication? So this diagram is actually showing you, 4 nets with 4 different RD score: 38, 48, 58, and 68. And what you are seeing into this is that it makes a significant difference in terms of their ability, to stay and to remain, effective through time. All in all, what is this showing you is that whenever you are increasing the RD score by 10 points, this is adding up 3.5 months of increased ITN lifespan. So that's something that is really important. And so when you are showing this, between the lowest score RD score of 38 and the maximum of 68, there is over a year in difference of lifespan. So this is giving you, an idea about how important this is going to be in terms of the capacity of the net to protect population when being deployed. So there's been some work, to actually validate the model and to ensure, that this is something that is real. And so this is just an illustration to show you that they've been tested to actually compare nets who were with an RD score of 80 to 83 against a net which will have an RD score of 40 to 65. And what you see is that those nets are on 2 very different trajectory. One, with the lowest RD score is on 2.2 years, whereas the other one with a high RD score is on a 4-year lifespan. And so all this is actually demonstrated in terms of what could be the public health impact of those products. So thanks to the work that Chai has done, I just wanted to show you, that when you are increasing and procuring a net with a 10 RD point, this can reduce the malaria cases by 5 to 6% in sub-Saharan Africa over a 3-year period compared to the baseline. So these are really important numbers showing you that when we are working on those type of elements, when we are making net more durable, that is expected to translate into significant public health value. There is also an economic dimension to it. So again, this is a back of the envelope estimation provided by Chai, but which is giving you, an idea that the added value or the premium, durability premium of a net with a 10 RD points additional is about $1.35. So this is, the quantification about the added value of this. But in addition to this, the other thing is that beyond, the notion, the economic impact, this is also an element that is related to the amount of plastic that can be saved by extending, the duration of the net in use in the field. So here, making the assumption that each net is about 500 grams, this could translate into an 84,000 metric ton of plastic that could be saved over the same period of 3 years. So what could be the application of the RD score? The first element that you need to take into consideration is that right now, and this may not last, but right now, there is not a correlation between RD score and the price of the net, meaning that this is not, the cheapest net with a lower RD score and the highest, than the most expensive net with the highest RD score. It's a lot more diverse. But there is an expectation that that RD score is going to be adopted, and this is especially adopted, by procurer into the way that they are going to source the different nets. We would like to share as well that there have been a number of consultation, and there is especially one consultation with WHO in August 2025, and we are still waiting for the results to be published. But this is something that is expected to make it to the guidelines that are going to be published by WHO. So what are going to be the added value? The first, as we said, to the procurement community. The donor procurement, which hopefully will be able to use those type of indicators to have metrics that are going to guide their choice in terms of nets that they are going to choose and deploy in different countries. But it will have also a benefit at country level, where this is going to facilitate country decision making in terms of which net can be best placed into which area, and also how to inform durability. And finally, the last item is actually for organizations such as myself, related to innovation. So IVCC, who is supporting industrial partners with the development of the ITN, this is a dimension that we have already built into the product development process. And when we are doing those ITN development process, we are working with our manufacturer partners to ensure that from the get-go, we will aim to build nets that are going to be as durable as possible. We're balancing this obviously with the expected cost, because they need to remain affordable. But the durability is not the only factor which is at hand here. The net lifetime is also enormously impacted by how bed nets are going to be used and how they are going to be maintained. So all the use settings and the human interaction and attitude. So here, the analogy is, with those two cars, you can have, the same car, but if you are driving this car in a very smooth road and you're servicing it often, it's going to last a lot longer than if you have a car that you are not servicing and that you are driving on a very rocky road. Well, that's exactly the same thing with ITN. Depending upon how it is going to be maintained in the field, how this is going to be serviced, then you are going to be able to extend it. So this is why there is another index, the risk index, that have been created in order to be able to capture this dimension of how bed nets are actually being maintained and used by end user into the different countries. So this is quantifying the social and environment pressure that net faces in household. This is to illustrate to you that this is something real and tangible. So here in those two graphs, what you see is that this is the same bed net, but which is placed into a variety of different regions in Nigeria. And here, depending upon how those bed nets are being maintained, you can see that it varies dramatically from, let's say a year to something that more than 4 years. And this just by how they are going to be used, and maintained by household. This is applying, to all type of nets, including PBO and chlorphenapyr. So this risk index calculation, as always, is an aggregation of different factors. And here we are talking about 3 factors: net handling, net care and attitude, and the net and use environment. Out of those 3 factors, clearly, there is a very large premium on net handling and net care attitude, with net use environment being at a lower one. But when you are combining all those different elements, this is how you are calculating the risk index. And so this last diagram is actually showing you, the relationship between the risk index and the survival estimation of the net. To make it super simple, every time that you are reducing the risk index of 10 points, you are gaining, 2 months of additional net lifespan. So again, I mean, in terms of advocacy in country, when people are communicating, to end user, these are elements that are going to significantly have an impact in terms of how long nets are going to last in use. It is important to understand that those two indicators, the risk index and the RD score, are independent, and there is no direct interaction between one and the other. But those two dimensions are critical to understand because, and especially, if you are operating within an environment with a very high risk index, you may have, a very durable net, but because it's going to be not well serviced, then you are not going to be able to, to bring it to 3 years. So this is what this diagram is showing and trying to illustrate that even with a 60 RD score, if you are in a high risk index, you are not going to get it to 3 years. So this is my last slide, just to say that we are expecting that those indicators are going to have profound application, for national program. I mean, first, the RD score is really an opportunity, to further inform how nets are being procured, and this is something extremely practical and something that hopefully you can based on. The risk index is something that is more, help to identify, what is the situation and what is the amount of advocacy that needs to be done to the different communities to really put the net into an environment where they will have a chance, to be used as long as possible and to provide, a protective protection to the communities as long as possible. With this, I would like to thank you, and hopefully, we will be able to address some of your questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, les présentateurs. Nous allons passer aux questions. Si vous avez des questions, vous pouvez les poser. OK. Première, oui. Deuxième. Troisième. OK. Donc, 3 personnes qui s'inscrivent. Quatrième? Non? OK. Quatrième. Okay. La première.
OK, merci. Je suis Dr Khalil de la Guinée, programme PALU. Alors, ma question s'adresse à la deuxième présentation. Bon, au cours de la deuxième présentation, on a entendu dire que l'organisation appuie les pays et l'année dernière, c'était 7 pays. Donc, au cours de cette année, l'organisation va donner 30 à 40 millions de moustiquaires pour appuyer la campagne. J'aimerais savoir, vu que nous organisons la campagne en 2028, ça c'est déjà arrivé, est-ce que quel est le volume de moustiquaires que l'organisation compte mettre à la disposition des pays en 2027 et 2028? Ça, c'est ma première question. La deuxième question, c'est à propos des emballages individuels. Vous savez, au cours des campagnes, on se rend compte que ça devient un défi, la gestion de tous ces emballages-là. Alors qu'on vient de nous dire que les emballages individuels seront recommandés pour les prochaines moustiquaires et les prochaines années. Est-ce qu'on pourrait en tenir compte du mode de gestion de ces emballages-là pour alléger la tâche des organisateurs de la campagne? Merci.
La deuxième question.
Alexis from Cameroon Investigate. My question goes to Kate. If I got you well, Kate, you said in the introduction that Global Fund is moving towards significantly reducing funding or even stopping funding in some countries you referred to as high income. May we have an idea what these countries you consider high income are in sub-Saharan Africa? And the second question is, are they informed and have you worked together a transition plan so they can get prepared? Thank you.
Merci. Le troisième.
My comment is for IVCC, especially on durability results. As countries, this is made from Uganda, we have done durability studies and get on in such a conference, discuss and make good recommendations. The key recommendations is empowering the SBCC, the communication aspects, to make sure that the net care European consistency is put to place. But our discussions in these conferences have never translated into resources to support the mechanism, both funding and budgeting. When it comes at the budgeting level, SBCC is given less than 2%. How do you expect the durability studies from all of these results will give us results to move away from the current picture rather than blaming the factory item? Thank you very much.
Merci. La quatrième question. Oui.
Okay. Merci bien aux organisateurs. Les intervenants sont complémentaires. Donc, ma question va s'adresser à Chai et puis à l'AMF qui sont en ligne. Je voudrais savoir, à partir de ce qui a été dit par le Fonds mondial, nous savons qu'il y aura une réduction du financement sur GC7 et forcément, ça va impacter sur un certain nombre d'activités, dont les campagnes moustiquaires au profit des activités de prise en charge et la CPS. Est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, vous avez des mécanismes pour permettre aux pays qui s'apprêtent à écrire leurs subventions GC8 pour pouvoir commencer les discussions afin d'accéder aux éventuels gaps qu'on aura pour l'acquisition des moustiquaires? Et peut-être une dernière question sur la durabilité des moustiquaires. Est-ce qu'au-delà des études que vous faites sur la durabilité des moustiquaires, il y a aujourd'hui des supports qui sont développés avant la validation de l'OMS auxquels on peut accéder pour intégrer dans nos documents techniques? Merci.
Merci. Peut-être on va passer aux réponses. Après, on revient au deuxième groupe de questions. Il y a eu 4 questions. Les 2 premières questions, c'est pour Kate. Oui.
Thank you. I'm going to pass the question on the emballage to Anne-Sophie online, and I'll just answer the questions about the funding. So for Guinea, if I understand well, you're asking when you will know and how much money will be available for distributions in 2027, 2028 and onwards. I don't think it was a question just to Global Fund, but I'll answer from our side at least. No countries have yet been communicated the level of budget that they're going to have for Grant Cycle 8, but that will be communicated during March on the current timeline. So that information should be with the country program very soon, and that can kick off the thinking through about how then to manage what will of course be reduced budgets for the next grant cycle, and can inform the funding request development. The question from Cameroon about the transition from Vestergaard for the transition planning. So it's an overall global fund approach. It is not specific to malaria. So it's an overall approach to increase the focus of the funding in the lowest economic capacity countries. That means for countries that we have previously been supporting, there will be an accelerated transition plan. Transition plans with countries is something we've always had. So there's always been countries which are on a plan towards transition out of Global Fund funding, but this is something that will then accelerate in some places. But having said that, it is, of course, as you said, not that much of an issue for malaria. So in Sub-Saharan Africa and for most of the countries where we have malaria grants, that's not the situation. Malaria is much more concentrated in the low-income countries, so it's more of a visible change for the HIV and the TB grants than it is for the malaria grants.
Okay. La troisième question, c'est...
Oh yeah, sorry, Anne-Sophie.
Nous, comme on a indiqué pour la campagne, on ne permet pas maintenant, puisqu'on a l'exemption d'emballage individuel. Donc ça va dans le sens que vous dites. On laisse une possibilité pour les routines de permettre toujours d'avoir un emballage individuel. Parce que c'est dans le cas où, bien sûr, tous les moustiquaires ne sont pas toutes distribués, et si une fois que la balle est ouverte, le fait que ces moustiquaires soient dans un emballage individuel a été demandé par certains pays. Si maintenant vous ne souhaitez pas du tout, même pour la campagne de routine, qui est d'emballage individuel, c'est quelque chose qu'on peut faire. Merci.
Merci. La prochaine question, c'était dirigée à IFCC.
Thank you. Maybe I will have to ask a little bit of clarification from the gentleman from Kenya. Am I correct to understand that the question was related to who is resourcing and budgeting from durability study in country? Is this correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you please clarify your question to make sure that I understand correctly that that your question was related to...
Micro.
My question on durability.
Yeah.
The results you are showing us are not new. We have been discussing it over time. We need to put a mechanism to make sure the gaps we have in operation in the field are addressed, especially in areas of funding SBCC for net care, repair, and use. Those are the key areas we need to be move forward rather than focusing on the factory. Because we have cared for our clothes for more than 10 years. Why can't we care for our nets for some good time? It is a mechanism to deliver this message. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comment. I mean, obviously, here, talking on behalf of IVCC, there are only, a number of things that we can take care of. So for us, I mean, there are two things that are going to be, within our remit. One of them will be related, to, the creation of the indicator, advocating it, to the different organizations, and especially, making sure that this is something that is going to be referenced not only by WHO, but also, by the donors. But on the other hand, the key things from an IVCC standpoint is to make sure that these indicators are part of the product development process, because that's what we are doing. This is what we are supporting. Things that are related, to social behavior, related to how advocacy, are being made, in country. I mean, I can only agree with you that this is something that is absolutely key, urgent, needed, and so on. But that's, for country programs and other organizations, to resource appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Il y avait une dernière question de Mali pour Anne Traite de Chai. Anne? Anne, est-ce que vous nous entendez?
Anna, are you online?
She had to drop off the call at past.
Elle n'est pas là.
Elle n'est pas là. OK. On peut passer. Il y avait une autre question. Il y avait un monsieur qui avait soulevé la main. Première, on va prendre encore 3-4 questions. Deuxième, troisième, quatrième. C'est bon? OK. La première question, s'il vous plaît.
Ok. Donc, je disais que ma première question aussi était destinée à Chai, si elle n'est pas en ligne. Je voudrais voir si effectivement Chai appuie donc des pays dans la mise en œuvre des pulvérisations et si c'est le cas, et quels étaient donc les critères d'éligibilité donc de ces pays. Et on était vraiment intéressés parce que je me nomme Ada Thierry du Burkina Faso. Et ma deuxième question était également adressée à IVCC. Ici, on parle de la durabilité des moustiquaires, c'est vrai, mais dans les prédations, on se rend compte que généralement, on acquiert les mildas sur les normes établies donc, pour les commandes au niveau du Fonds mondial, sans toutefois tenir compte souvent des réalités dans lesquelles les mildas seront utilisés. Réalité socioculturelle, les gens en fonction de leur habitation, en fonction de leurs moyens, doivent adapter ces moustiquaires dans leur milieu de vie. Donc, ici, l'image qui a été présentée où un véhicule roule sur du goudron, un autre sur des cailloux, naturellement, ne vont pas avoir la même façon d'être. C'est exactement ce qui est sur notre continent et notre réalité. Des ménages sont dépourvus, ils sont obligés d'attacher les moustiquaires dans le milieu où ils vivent et inversement aussi des ménages qui ont les opportunités pour bien attacher. Donc, est-ce que sur cette base, il n'y a vraiment pas lieu de voir comment est-ce qu'on adapte la moustiquaire aussi au milieu que d'avoir des spécifications standards qui ne marchent pas à tous les niveaux? Merci.
Merci. Le deuxième. C'est bon.
Merci. So that's a question for IVCC. I'm Amy for Vestergaard. Question of semantics. We hear ORD, we hear WRD, and we hear RD score. So ORD, I guess, is original RD score. WRD being the weighted RD score. I've only seen consistency in the presentation of AMF saying very clearly weighted RD score is what we will look at. But can you tell us a bit more? What are we supposed to say? What are you considering when you're talking about RD score? Because the results that we may find online are different when we talk RD score and weighted RD score. Thanks.
Thank you. Le troisième.
Okay, I want to thank all the presenters. With respect to the presentation on the global malaria commodities forecast, from what I saw in the presentation, rather than doing a 10-year forecast, you did a 5-year forecast. I want to understand on what basis. Is it in relation to the funding restriction, or is it in relation to the needs across the periods for the country? Because I was wondering if it's in relation to the needs. Why not do a 10-year forecasting? That will help countries to start anticipating after 2030. If we have an idea of the forecast beyond that period in relation to the need, countries can start anticipating on how they will be mobilizing funds through their governments to prepare for that period. Thank you.
Thank you. La quatrième et dernière question.
Hi there, Sarah from GiveWell. My question's for Kate. I'm curious if the Global Fund has plans related to RD scores, either in terms of RD scores informing procurement decisions or issuing any sort of guidance related to using RD scores. Thanks.
Thank you. Nous avons 4 questions. La première question est destinée à Shai. Je ne sais pas si elle est en ligne. Non. Nous passons à la deuxième question. C'est pour Mathieu.
Can you hear me? Yes. Je vais répondre à la première question en français, puisqu'elle m'a été adressée en tant que telle. Et la question était de savoir comment est-ce que les moustiquaires peuvent être adaptés au milieu dans lequel ils vont être déployés. Et bon, c'est une très grande question pour nous. Alors encore une fois, je me place de mon point de vue, qui est d'aider le développement de nouveaux produits. Donc c'est extrêmement difficile pour nous d'anticiper tous les différents milieux dans lesquels les moustiquaires peuvent être mis en place. Par contre, ce qui est évident, c'est qu'on va essayer de travailler un maximum sur comment est-ce qu'on peut augmenter la durabilité intrinsèque de ces moustiquaires. Comment est-ce qu'on peut les rendre plus résistantes de manière à ce qu'elles soient capables de démontrer leur résistance dans un maximum de milieux. Et ça passe par un certain nombre d'éléments techniques qui sont non seulement liés à la composition elle-même des moustiquaires en termes des différents composants chimiques, mais c'est aussi la manière dont elles sont knitted, mais aussi de la manière dont elles peuvent être faites avec un certain nombre de renforcements à des endroits stratégiques de manière à ce qu'elles puissent être le plus durables possible et puissent supporter des endroits comme être dans des endroits qui vont être particulièrement abrasifs, être dans des endroits dans lesquels elles ne vont pas être en capacité d'être maintenues de manière complète. Mais encore une fois, je reviens à l'essence de cette présentation que j'ai faite, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a vraiment 2 éléments. Un élément qui est lié à la moustiquaire elle-même et le niveau de durabilité qu'elle peut avoir avant qu'elle soit mise en utilisation, mais il y a aussi tout le travail qui est à faire de manière à ce qu'une fois distribuée, une fois mise en place dans les habitations des différentes communautés, elle puisse être bien maintenue et utilisée de manière optimale. Et ça, c'est quelque chose qui nécessite l'engagement des différents programmes en termes de communication, d'information et de s'assurer de la coopération des différents utilisateurs. Donc voilà, il n'y a pas de solution miracle, mais encore une fois, ça nécessite vraiment d'utiliser toute la chaîne de valeur. Then I'm going to switch back to English for the question from Vestergaard related to ORD, WRD, and RD. Not being the specialist of these, I'm sorry I cannot really answer that, but that's something that I can follow up, with this. I mean, I can only agree with you that being consistent about it is something that would be valuable. So let me check it out first, and I'll get back to you. Thank you.
Merci Mathieu. La troisième question, c'était adressée à Anne sur le forecasting de Milda.
C'est Anne qui n'est pas là.
Elle n'est pas là. OK. Et donc, la quatrième question, c'est adressée à vous, Kate.
Yeah, thank you.
Merci.
I'm just going to answer briefly, but then also pass to Anne-Sophie. So Matthias mentioned, I think it was, I can't remember which presentation, we mentioned that the WHO report of the meeting last year isn't yet out, so we are eagerly anticipating that, and we'll be able to respond a bit more once we see that. But I think I'll hand to Anne-Sophie to talk about how we envisage potentially, or when and if, using RD scores in procurement decisions. But obviously there's also been some conversation about using RD scores and the risk index maybe in programmatic decision making. I think we need to think more carefully about how that might work, but overall I would say the ambition would be that RD scores are a way to raise the not quality, but raise the durability of nets overall. of benefit to programs, rather than imagining a world where nets have different RD scores and we target certain nets with certain RD scores to different contexts. That would become very complicated, I think. And if it's true that we can get higher RD scores with no impact on cost, then I think the easiest for everybody would probably just be to raise the quality overall, have some better standards, and reap the benefits that way. But over to Anne-Sophie for the procurement aspect.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. So as Kate mentioned, we are also waiting to have further information in order we can have discussion internally, just to see how we can implement that. Because as we say, I think we are all also, as Kate said, we want to integrate that, and by default, we want to integrate that also in our procurement. But what we want to make sure also is that how we implement that, how we're monitoring that, and how we are the most, at least fair regarding the evaluation. And also, as we said, take this risk index, that we should not just look at the theory and take some, I think, strong decision regarding the supplier base. And I think it's something that definitively wants to go for it. The question when we will implement that, it will be really depend on our discussion internally. Either we are ready and we can integrate in our next tender, and if not, we'll try in that case to leave the door open to implement that during the implementation of our framework contract agreement. So I hope it just answers the question.
Merci, Anne-Sophie. Oui.
Sorry, do you mind? So WhatsApp is fantastic. So since I've been discussing, my colleagues have been frantically, giving me some answers. So back to the question that you raised. And so if I am reading correctly, the idea is that the RD score system, has evolved through time because we were trying, to right size it, right fix it in terms of the weighing of the different elements. So now there's been a simplification linked to it, and now we are actually only referring to RD score, and that was the equivalent of weighing RD score. So hopefully, out of all those, now we are only talking about RD scores, and with I'm going to leave it at this, and just to say that again, that's part of the simplification process, including the different factors that are included into it. That this is what I referred into my presentation as we have removed the aberration out of it, and I hope that this is something that is going to be referred as it when the WHO documentation will come out. Thank you for your patience.
Merci à tous les intervenants pour la richesse de ces échanges. Plusieurs messages clés émergent clairement de cette session. La nécessité d'une meilleure anticipation et une planification robuste, le partenariat de financement de l'approvisionnement de MILDA dans le contexte de réduction de coûts et le dommage des MILDA utilisés dans les foyers avec une application de indice de risque. Nous allons arrêter pour une pause café de 15 minutes. On remercie et on applaudit les présentateurs de cette session. Merci. Donc, on sera en salle à 16h05. Merci.
Je vais trouver le présentateur de l'UNICEF et aussi de Hamza pour assurer tout le monde est ici. Et le dernier, c'est une vidéo. Je vais assurer les deux ici dans la salle. Merci.
It works now.
It works. Test, test. Does it work? No, but as long as does it work? Test. Tu vois? Ça marche?
Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Hello?
Check 1 2.
Microphone check 1 2.
Check 1 2.
Check 1 2. Microphone check 1 2. Hello, hello. Mic check 1 2. Mic check 1 2. Hello.
Oui, peut-être ça marche.
Bon après-midi à tous. Allô? Est-ce que tout le monde est là? Boa tarde a todos. Boa tarde. Podemos começar?
Aqui não há tradução.
Não, isso aí era só para
Provocar.
provocar. Senhores, andam. Ok. Oui. Bonsoir, boa tarde. Nous pouvons reprendre les places. Nous allons commencer la deuxième partie de présentation de cet après-midi. Oui, mesdames et messieurs, vous pouvez prendre votre place, s'il vous plaît. Ok. Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. Nous allons passer aux deuxième partie des présentations de cet après-midi avec thème de gestion des déchets et de plastique liés aux moustiquaires imprégnés d'insecticides. Nous allons voir la présentation en vidéo sur la réduction des déchets et de plastique liés au MILDA. Ce thème sera présenté par Valeria Mortova d'UNICEF qui sera online avec nous. Je demande au monsieur Hamza Sam du PNLP de Soudan pour rejoindre au podium qui va nous parler de gestion des déchets dans un environnement opérationnel complexe. Et à la fin, nous allons voir une vidéo de AMP sur la gestion des déchets de MILDA aussi. Merci. Le vidéo, s'il vous plaît.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valerie Markova. I'm a contact specialist working in UNICEF Supply Division. It's UNICEF Global Supply Headquarters based in Copenhagen. I'm honored today to present on behalf of UNICEF and the big group of partners and to provide you with an update about the work done in relation to reduction of plastic waste in ITN's delivery. Today, the world reached and surpassed 3 billion ITNs delivered globally, and we are delivering more than 200 million nets annually. And for years, ITNs have been delivered individually packed in plastic bags. This has been the norm for the industry, governments, and global procurers. However, the environmental concerns were growing, and this approach of nets delivered in individual bags was challenged due to an excessive plastic waste footprint left in communities that often lack adequate waste management systems. So, removing individual plastic bags seemed to be one of the simplest and most impactful changes. This shift from individual to bulk packaging started gradually a few years back, and it was steadily growing as more and more deliveries, especially for the mass campaigns, were happening in bulk, without individual bags. This slide might help us better visualize the impact and also the potential gains. This is the screenshot of UNICEF public dashboard reporting on single-use plastic reduction in ITN deliveries. Building on our earlier work, UNICEF developed a system that enables tracking and public reporting of the reduction in plastic waste. The data generated also helped us to estimate associated cost savings and project reinvestments. As you can see from left to right, to date, this helped UNICEF to avoid almost 736 kilograms of plastic and saved more than $2 million to national malaria programs. The projected reinvestment is equal to getting more than 1 million additional ITNs instead of plastic waste. The money, of course, can be reprogrammed not only for supply, but any other relevant programmatic activities contributing to malaria elimination. UNICEF is also working to update the dashboard with the data on the respective CO2 emission mitigation. The figures you can see on the screen reflect only UNICEF deliveries, so we can imagine how significant the numbers would be if we looked at the global volumes. According to UNICEF's strategy, 80% of procured ITNs have to be bulk packed without bags. During the implementation of the strategy and scaling up of the bulk packaging approach, we identified a bottleneck. The industry signaled unclarity, or rather gap, in the existing transport regulations for ITNs. A deep investigation into the regulatory framework uncovered that the transport rules basically had not kept pace with innovation and market development. ITNs were being treated like traditional chemical products. The confusion came from how transport regulations were formulated. As they were standing, they could actually hinder bulk delivery of ITNs. This mainly related to how the UN Article 3077 and the few other potentially relevant articles were applied. The issue was that the existing UN classification focused on the total amount of the insecticide, without considering how insecticide is integrated into the final product, in our case, the ITN. The guidelines define hazardous substance as either liquid or solid, but that doesn't really apply to ITNs. While ITNs do contain insecticide, it's not in liquid or solid form. It is sealed in the plastic fibers. This makes ITN quite different from standalone chemicals, which fall under respective UN articles. So distinguishing between insecticide as a raw substance and insecticide that is impregnated into a product like ITN could help clarify things for manufacturers, shippers, and regulators. And that kind of clarity would make compliance easier and help streamlining logistics for ITNs. And to move this forward, global partners decided to approach the UN regulator to seek clarification and potentially update the existing guidelines. From the timeline on the left, you can see it was a pretty quick yet intense project, which roughly took a bit more than half a year. In January last year, UNICEF initiated a dialogue with United Nations Economic Commission for Europe to present and to validate the case. UNEC got back to us with good feedback. They validated the case and guided us to make a proposal jointly with WHO, who were already the active members of the committee. Following the feedback received from UNEC, UNICEF, together with the Global Fund and Alliance for Malaria Prevention, got together to discuss an overall approach to the submission process. Further, a multi-stakeholder working group was formed, including WHO, the Global Fund, MP, IMF, IVCC. The working group actually relied on a diverse pool of experts, including specialists in chemical safety, quality assurance, industry, dangerous goods transporter experts, sustainability and packaging experts. We were also specifically relying on the technical scientific expertise coming from the industry. BASF, Vestergaard, VKA, Sumitomo were consulting and supporting us extensively. Together, we built a strong case for regulatory clarification. There were different considerations and deliberation. Chemical and dangerous goods experts discussed and reviewed many factors. They helped to explain the nature of the product and its fundamental characteristics. The backbone of the thinking was that ITN is a low-risk product which has active ingredient, the insecticide, in a very low concentration, and that this insecticide is not free-flowing but bound in plastic. Also, the ITN is designed as a slow and controlled release product. So in April, after a series of meetings and workshops, the working group developed and submitted to UNEC a formal proposal. The proposal was focusing on amending or adapting the existing regulation provisions, creating new provisions probably to reflect better the nature of the ITNs and propose relevant exemptions. Exceptions. Further, UNICEF and WHO engaged with UNSC country members for discussion and feedback. Their input shaped development of additional document that would support and explain further the initial proposal. In June 2025, the committee held its 66th session in Geneva. UNICEF, WHO Department of Epidemic and Pandemic Preparedness and Prevention, and WHO Vector Control Pre-Qualification Team, the Global Fund and BSF delegated representatives to attend the meeting. The case was presented for the committee's consideration. Based on the comments that we received from the member states, we organized an ad hoc working group. And as a result of that work, the committee finally adopted the proposal with changes. Basically granting a general exemption for ITNs from the dangerous goods regulations. This actually was the bravest idea that our working group had back in March, but we never dared to propose this to the regulator. So the report and the minutes of the committee were published. And once that happened, UNICEF and the Global Fund, together with WHO Vector Control PQ team, developed a communication to the industry to explain the reform, its implications, and required updates to product this year. Further, WHO issued a new series of advice to manufacturers, which included specifically change application to amend packaging of ITNs. We know that the market is moving ahead with the change applications and is working with the PQ team to clarify and formalize this. So what is ahead? Not less exciting work on implementation. Building on this regulatory milestone, UNICEF is conceptualizing a proposal for a cross-sectoral initiative to develop model requirements for ITNs, packaging, and folding. On a more practical or maybe even bureaucratic side, the Orange Book, the high-level UN model regulations, this book is published every 2 years. And the next updated version of the book with the amendment related to ITNs, this version will be published in 2027. Meanwhile, the International Maritime Organization, which manages the IMDG code for maritime transportation, they may revise their guidelines even before, within this year. And while we are waiting for updates, revisions, ratifications, and publishing, UNICEF engaged with dangerous goods experts to explore a bridging solution, kind of a practical adaptation of decision made in July last year, and this turned to be a success. We addressed Danish Maritime Authority with a petition to grant exemption to ITNs and enable bulk shipment immediately. Based on the proposal adopted by UNSC, such exemption was granted by the Danish Maritime Authority. DMA, in its turn, reached out to the International Maritime Organization in London and informed about such exemption. So what is the applicability of such exemption and what it practically means? Such exemption issued by the Danish Maritime Authority is valid for 5 years and is adopted, followed by all maritime authorities globally. It basically gives all public procurers a highway to bypass the red tape of ratifications, amendments, and updated versions. All partners and manufacturers, of course, were informed about this solution and its immediate applicability. More to come in the next years. And as I said, it's a big chunk of work we need to digest to rethink the ITN's packaging. Current packaging and folding techniques used in ITN deliveries are legacy practices that have not evolved in line with modern transportation, distribution, and sustainability needs. These methods lack standardization across procurers and suppliers, which may lead to inefficiencies and missed opportunities for innovation. We have different container stuffing capacity, different bales in terms of material and shape, and these and many other things need to be considered. Simultaneously, discussions around the programmatic shift towards continuous distribution over mass campaigns may result in new and different requirements from countries. The recent exemption from dangerous goods regulations presents a timely opportunity to establish optimized and sustainable industry standards that address these challenges. UNICEF is ready to work with the partners and move this agenda forward. To conclude, I would like to say a huge thank you to all partners that were actively supporting and contributing to the process of proposal development, providing expertise and dedicated lots of time, hours and hours. There was not a single time or a single moment that we were not able to get together, to get attention or advice or expertise required. Everyone was always available, engaged, and ready to help. WHO Department of Epidemic and Pandemic Preparedness and Prevention, WHO Vector Control PQ team, the Global Fund, Alliance for Malaria Prevention, MARCI, IVCC, AMF, the industry, BSF, Vestergaard, VKA. Thank you all very much. It's been an exciting journey, and we look forward to work with partners together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valeria. Nous passons maintenant la parole à Hamza San du PNLP de Soudan qui va nous présenter la gestion des déchets dans un environnement opérationnel complexe. Le parole est à vous.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Hamza Sami, Federal Minister of Health, to discuss waste management during campaign in Sudan 2025. Next slide. Previously, there was no well-organized method for disposing of net waste. Was disposed of by with regular waste via garbage truck and reusing it by some people how used for other purpose. But in the 2025 campaign, from the initial planning stage, there was focus on proper waste disposal due to the large quantity of nets. Separate plan developed with budget covering all waste management process from collection and transportation to final disposal. The campaign targeted more than 15 million nets for distribution, resulting around 313 hectometres. To ensure proper implementation of waste management process, commit with clear rules and responsibilities were appointed to oversee all process according to the written guidelines. Type of waste disposed of individual net bag and ITN's packaging material and use PPE. We had two type, individual bag and bulk bag. There are three methods used of waste management. Household living waste management for individual nets bag. This is material for packaging individual nets were biodegradable. And household were advised not to use them for domestic purpose and to dispose of them with regular household waste. Also, SBC message target household regarding the proper handling of net bag and not reusing. The second method, disposal via incineration. The incinerators that used were meet WHO guidelines and were provided by the European Union. Only 2 states just have this incinerator. Third method, disposal by burning and burial. This was carried out in 10 states by constructing pits according to the WHO guidelines. The stakes, the waste went through from DBs to final disposal. At the distribution point, daily tracking and control of the number of balls moved in each day of the distribution to each DBs, as well as for the number of balls material returned to the administrative unit store. Cross-checking conducted in the presence of the distribution point supervisor. And recording was done on a specific form to ensure that all distribution points retain the correct number of balls. Empty balls were collected daily and placed in bags, each bag conducting 30 to 50 empty balls. Transportation form from the distribution point to the locality or state warehouses, and transportation was usually done daily, but sometimes back from several days were collected together depending on the situation. And at the locality level, empty ball bags arriving from administrative unit were received using warehouses. The empty ball bags were checked by the locality warehouses keeper. Daily recording of the ball bags was kept in separate log, and daily report was submitted. Deadline, the number received, and the accepted remaining quantity distribution point. Empty ball bags were stored in the locality warehouses until the locality waste management committee determined the final disposal date. At the state level, this level applies only the 2 states that use incinerator. Empty balls were transported from DBs to locality and then to the state warehouses using warehouses form. The quantity received were checked by the state warehouse keeper. Empty balls were stored until the state waste management committee determines the appropriate time for incineration. Next. Disposal of waste via incinerator. Used waste from 2 states, Gadarib and Kassala. This is a specification of incinerator used. Operating capacity 150 kilogram cycle per cycle. Temperature 500 to 1200. According to the Basel Convention. Zero water vapor. This is the specification to incinerator. Next. The burning and burial method used for waste management. The method was implementing according to WHO guidelines. And soil type with low permeability was selected away from any dwelling at distance of at least 100 meters from wells and other domestic water source. the dimension of the burning bit were 1 meter length and 2 meter width and 5 meter high. Layer of cement and concentrate was applied after the burning and burial process. What is this? Next. Challenge the lack of sufficient incinerator that meet international standard in all states, and actual cost of waste management was higher than planned, particularly in Darfur state due rising material price. This is the lead. Some states use the local incinerator even if they did not meet WHO recommendation for temperature and emission. Also, transportation costs from this distribution point to locality were also high in Darfur states. This is the first time that ITN's waste management has been disposed of according to guidelines, and it's a first step in the right direction despite some challenge faced in the implementation. Thank you for it.
Merci beaucoup, Hamza Sani, de PNLP Soudan. Nous allons voir maintenant une vidéo sur la gestion des déchets de Milda par ANEP.
Since 2004, the scale of malaria interventions has been unprecedented. Through global coordination, over 3.5 billion insecticide-treated nets have been produced and shipped worldwide. The delivery of roughly 3.1 billion of these ITN units has been concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. It is one of the largest sustained logistical movements of synthetic material for use in disease prevention in history. But the material reality is that ITNs are manufactured from high-density polyethylene and polyester, and collectively, this intervention has introduced more than 2 million tons of plastic into the region. These nets have a functional lifespan of just a few years. Once the insecticide wears off or the fabric tears, they can quickly transition from being a vector control tool to a waste management problem. And the waste problem begins even before a net reaches a home. The packaging, the individual bags, straps, and baling materials create an immediate waste stream at the time of distribution that requires urgent management. In rural and urban Africa, discarded plastic can often accumulate in open drainage channels where it entangles with organic debris to form impermeable plugs that cause stagnant water to overflow, creating flood hazards and breeding grounds for diseases. Research suggests that nearly a third of the volume of old nets and packaging end up in open-air burn piles. This converts the plastic into hazardous atmospheric emissions and microplastic runoff, trading one health risk for another. It's challenging. Sometimes there's little option but to adapt a waste management best practice into a next to best waste management practice. Because formal disposal infrastructure is often absent, there are also massive rates of misuse or inappropriate repurposing of ITNs with which to contend. To protect the progress we've made against malaria, our next great logistical challenge is the responsible management of the materials that made that progress possible. For years, national malaria programs and their global partners have recognized and responded to this challenge. with the acknowledgement that they aren't just distributing nets, they are simultaneously being tasked with creating the pathway for there to be a responsible life cycle for every item of vector control material introduced. We are already seeing the impact of national malaria programs specifying delivery of ITNs in bulk packaging rather than in individual bags. By removing individual plastic sleeves and optimizing transport volumes, national malaria programs have successfully cut millions of tons of single-use plastic before it ever reaches the community. Success like this isn't new territory. We've seen this success before with indoor residual spraying. Programs established rigorous protocols to ensure operations were tracked, contaminants neutralized, and any waste disposed of without environmental harm. Today, the opportunities to expand on past successes have increased. The private sector is no longer on the sidelines. We are entering a new era of public-private partnerships where advanced technology and the expertise of local industry is able to address the scale of public health waste management requirements. The available tech environment has also shifted significantly. Previously unexplored opportunities for partnership in countries like Nigeria and Ghana, as well as others, are emerging, turning the waste into wealth for local businesses and enterprises. Firstly, there's upcycling, collecting and passing along used strapping material to organizations and initiatives that subsequently use the straps as the primary material for weaving new, attractive baskets and handbags. Old ITNs themselves can also be recycled, but to recycle old ITNs, they must first be collected. This involves significant planning and coordination. By shredding nets and packaging to create plastic sand composites, we aren't just cleaning the environment, we're building it. These bricks are stronger, more durable, and more water resistant than traditional concrete. Structures made from these bricks heat up more slowly in the blazing sun. For industrial scale impact, there is also an opportunity to have secondary raw material production. Shredded plastic is converted into high-grade PCR feedstock. These pellets become the essential starting material for extruding electrical conduit and other tubing used for construction in local communities. There's also advanced chemical recycling, or pyrolysis, which acts as the ultimate reset button. It can potentially handle very dirty or degraded nets made from polyethylene with ease, chemically unzipping the polymers back into gas and oil. By solving the waste problem, we prevent open-air burning, reduce toxic emissions, and provide low-cost infrastructure inputs for the very communities the nets were sent to protect. This is how we ensure that the tools of health today build the foundations of tomorrow. We are at a crucial crossroads. This is our opportunity to take ITN waste management to scale, aligning our efforts with both broader global and hyper-local plastic initiatives and setting the stage for every tool that follows. We must be candid. Not every attempt will be perfect. Innovation is inherently messy, and in this space, we won't always succeed on the first try. Learning from mistakes is the most important part of improving the work we do today. This work isn't just about plastic. Solving for ITN waste is the blueprint for the next generation of public health challenges. Malaria programs will inevitably face new hurdles, like the rising tide of e-waste from digital health tools and the plastic waste generated by introduction of new vector control tools like spatial emanators. By building these systems now, we aren't just cleaning up the past, we are applying learned practices to the vector control tools of the future. We are ensuring that our health systems are as sustainable as they are effective. The moment to innovate is now, because the legacy of our fight against malaria should be a healthier world, not a more polluted one.
Merci. Nous allons prendre quelques questions ou commentaires s'il y en a. Vous pouvez vous inscrire. Pas de questions? Non? C'est bon. Merci beaucoup, Amsa. Merci beaucoup, Valeria Martova d'UNICEF. La gestion de déchets est un sujet sensible pour l'environnement. C'est un sujet des fois moins visible, mais aussi, absolument aussi essentiel pour nous tous, pour notre santé. Nous allons passer au dernier thème de cette journée. Je vais appeler les orateurs pour la plénière. Giovanni Dusabi de AMP. Oui. Aïssati Kone PNLP Mali. Orezi Abdekouyabu de CRS Nigeria. Dr. Roch Aikupon de PNLP Mali. Et Medard Rukari, je m'excuse si j'appelle mal le nom, NMAD de Ouganda. Ils vont nous parler sur qui faut-il faire différemment pour la distribution des MILDA à mesure que nous entrons dans un nouveau contexte de financement. Donc, on commence par Giovanni. La parole est à vous. Merci.
Merci. Donc, ce n'est pas une présentation, c'est beaucoup plus un panel. C'est un panel, so yeah. Good. Good afternoon, everyone. As she mentioned, my name is Giovanni Dusabe. I'm AMP Technical Assistant Provider, and I'll be moderating this last session of today, which is focusing on what to do differently in a new funding contexts. So we've been, we had Yeah, good. Can you hear me now? Better? Good. So we're going to go fast since we have already run over time. So we're discussing challenges related to the current funding context. We have today a panel of NMCPs and implementing partners who have very exciting ideas on how to tackle the challenges moving forward, especially as we are moving into the grant making phase. So as we mentioned, the question today is not whether things are changing. They have been, and life is dynamic. We have to expect this. But what do we do to adapt our programming and interventions? The panel discussion will be around four different strategic trade-offs. Access versus impact, campaign dominance versus diversification of channels, and scale versus system strengthening, and last, donor dependence versus sustainability, including financing locally and domestic funding. These tensions and operational realities that programs are facing already or about to face as they are entering into the grant-making process. So the scenario we might, one of the scenarios we might face in the future is having fewer nets than in the past, and what do we do in that case? So that's what the panel will be discussing. The panel members, I have on my left Dr. Rock from Benin. He's the NMCP Deputy National Coordinator, and he's public health entomologist and made the conference. And next to him is Medar. Medar is National Coordinator for ITNs in Malaria Control Division in Uganda. And next to Medar is Dr. Aissata Kone, who is the director of the NMCP in Mali. And then we have Dr. Orezi, who is senior manager, Vector Control, Grand Blue Fund, Maria Grant, CRS Nigeria. They are all of them bringing strategic leadership experience in governance, prioritization, and sustainability. So I will start with a very quick round for my panelists. A quick question in 45 seconds. What is one assumption about RTN distribution that we can no longer afford to hold? I will start with Dr. Rock and we go up to Dr. Orezi.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Giovanni. Bonsoir, Mesdames et Messieurs. Merci d'avoir initié cette discussion sur l'épineuse question d'efficacité, je dirais, de la mise en œuvre des campagnes dans un contexte de ressources limitées. Et comme vous pouvez déjà pressentir, ça sera une discussion, je ne dirais pas difficile, mais sensible, parce que des considérations historiques seront certainement revues. Closer. OK. Thank you. Donc, je parlais de la sensibilité de cette discussion qui est autant intéressante que sensible, parce qu'il y a des considérations certainement historiques sur lesquelles nous allons revenir. Et la première question qui est posée, si je comprends bien, c'est dans ce contexte, quelle hypothèse on peut mettre de côté en termes donc de distribution de moustiquaires dans un contexte de ressources limitées. C'est bien cela, Monsieur Giovanni. Comme vous le savez, les recommandations historiques de l'OMS ont promu la couverture universelle comme un standard. C'est vrai que c'est une approche, je dirais, idéale lorsque les ressources sont disponibles. Mais si on doit avoir des contraintes de ressources, je pense qu'on doit changer de paradigme. Il faut avoir le courage de le dire. Changer de paradigme la couverture universelle, une moustiquaire pour 2 personnes, pour tous les ménages et partout, inéluctablement ne sera plus possible. Et donc, s'il y a une hypothèse qu'il faut commencer par vouloir revoir, c'est cette recommandation historique de l'OMS derrière laquelle tous les pays courent quand on met en œuvre une campagne, c'est pour voir si on a assuré la couverture universelle. Donc, Monsieur Giovanni, voilà mon appréciation par rapport à cette première question.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Rock. Meda, what is your take on this?
Thank you very much. From the Uganda experience, especially on assumptions, we are looking at the existing government structures that have been fully funded between the government and the donors. I think it is high time that these government structures are de-reportized for the donors to support the last mile delivery to achieve the intended objective of the net. It means that the existing funded structures by the government should not be funded again by the donor during the implementation as part of prioritization. Then 2, we know that we have cities and the town councils. These urban areas have high net access, both private sector, even economically empowered to purchase. We need to rethink on how the free distribution should not kill the commercial outlet. This is a core as part of the assumptions to make sure that both channels are supported for sustainability and maintaining the high coverage. There are other assumptions we can review to fit within the budget and funding landscape. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Medar. Dr. Kone?
Merci beaucoup, Giovanni. Bonsoir tout le monde. D'abord, je tiens à remercier les organisateurs et surtout l'AMP pour tout le soutien qu'ils accordent au Mali lors de nos campagnes. Donc, pour répondre à votre question, je vais emboîter la voix de mes prédécesseurs. Il faut reconnaître que actuellement, là où nous en sommes, merci. C'est bon? Okay. Donc, avec le contexte quand même d'aménagement de financement international, il est temps pour tous les pays de revoir quand même la manière de distribution de nos moustiquaires. Comme il l'a dit, certes, nous ne pouvons pas tenir la couverture universelle, mais nous devons quand même nous baser sur la stratification, voir les zones qui sont prioritaires pour distribuer les moustiquaires. Et ce que nous ne pouvons pas tenir non plus, ça c'est la question d'égalité qui rentre dans la couverture universelle. Je pense que nous devons primer l'équité, c'est-à-dire donner les moustiquaires à ceux qui en ont vraiment besoin. Et avec la stratification, choisir les zones de forte transmission et les zones modérées aussi. Nous ne pouvons pas aussi nous permettre de se baser sur les campagnes comme étant les sources d'approvisionnement de nos populations. Il nous faut diversifier quand même les voies les canaux de distribution. Voilà, c'est ce que je peux dire en premier point.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Issata. Enfin, Dr. Orezi.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon again, everybody. In my perspective and in the Nigerian context, so I think that one assumption that we can no longer hold on to is that, having the same ITN distribution approach in all contexts. So what do I mean? We currently have different things that are going on. There's the rapid population growth, there's urbanization, and again, the big one, the limited funding. And because of this, we can't continue to do ITN distribution the way we currently do it. We can't continue to do mass campaign the way we currently plan mass campaign. So we need to be more strategic and try to do our ITN distributions in a way that are more targeted, so that at the end of the day, we are focusing on, places that really need the nets, places that have, very high malaria transmission. We need to focus on, the most vulnerable group, the pregnant women, children under 5, So basically, we just need to change the way we approach ITN distribution and not make it, that kind of fixed approach for all contexts. So I think that, our distribution approach needs to be more adaptive. We need to adapt it to what the current situation and the context is within the country. And our delivery methods should be based on, driven by data that is currently available, not a one-cap-fits-all for all situations. Thank you.
Thank you all. So what I'm getting is that we need to shift the paradigm, right? But concretely, for example, let's say we do get 50% fewer nets than what we used to have or what we need, we need, right? What will you, as a program, do differently in the next 2 years if you have 50% fewer nets? What would you prioritize? And could you give us like an example, a concrete example of something that is underway, an initiative in your country that is going in line with that situation? Dr. Rock?
Ok, merci. Merci, Giovanni. Ça, c'est une question difficile. C'est une question difficile et vous voulez qu'on commence la planification ici et maintenant. Si nous avons la moitié du besoin, qu'allons-nous faire de façon pratique? Évidemment, on ne peut plus continuer à faire les choses comme on le faisait avant. J'allais suggérer qu'il faut commencer par mettre de côté la vision de l'équité de façon horizontale et voir, comme on a commencé par le dire, l'équité basée sur le risque. Et cela nous amènera donc à un exercice de ciblage des plus vulnérables. Les femmes enceintes, les enfants doivent d'abord être la priorité. Il faut qu'on mette en place, je pense, une stratification pour pouvoir identifier les hotspots, les points chauds et les plus vulnérables. Je pense que ça sera la première action d'allocation de la moitié qu'on attend comme besoin. Je ne sais pas, et voir aussi, quand on a renforcé ces canaux de distribution, comme j'ai commencé par le dire, le concept de couverture universelle pour tout le monde, nous allons revenir malheureusement là-dessus et voir là où il y a vraiment le besoin. Et là, une moustiquaire devient un outil plus précieux qu'avant. Plus précieux, il y aura des exercices peut-être pour mieux entretenir la moustiquaire. Mieux entretenir la moustiquaire pour plus de durabilité peut nous amener aussi à revoir de façon cyclique, tel qu'on faisait les moustiquaires de façon automatique sur une base triennale. Il faut qu'on s'assure vraiment que toutes les moustiquaires distribuées s'amenuisent avant donc de renouveler. Donc l'outil deviendra, la moustiquaire deviendra un outil d'intervention plus précieux. C'est ce que je pense. Merci.
Thank you, Meda.
Yeah, if we are given the 50%, for example, yeah, for example, in Uganda, for the campaign, we target around 26 million nets. The 50% will translate into 30 million nets. So what are the key options to make sure that you have a burden reduction? I think number one, you do it, what we have been discussing in terms of prioritization. You look at the vulnerability. For example, in our country, in addition to the pregnant women and children under 5 years, you should also prioritize the refugees. should also prioritize the refugees. But we know that 50% of the available nets will cover the routine channels, but also have the balances. That means you do target distribution. But from the programmatic and technical perspective of the mass campaign, we need to do target campaign with scientific evidence. For example, in the country where we are having high malaria burden districts, we do stratification where we have the IRS districts, then we protect them for IRS district, the remaining high burden district, you do the target campaign. But in all, we are aiming at maximizing the impact and have very good results. But in summary, in that perspective, whether you have 10%, whether you have 1% or 10%, every problem has a solution. You need to prepare your mind that whatever problem is on a table, there is a thinking to make sure that you get a solution and have the desired results. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je trouve qu'avec 50% quand même de moustiquaires, la science, comme les autres l'ont dit, nous a facilité beaucoup de choses. Hein. On se base sur la stratification pour cibler vraiment ceux qui en ont besoin, c'est-à-dire les zones de très forte transmission. Donc, nous les prenons d'abord comme cible, mais surtout en se basant sur les moins de 5 ans et les femmes enceintes qui se trouvent dans ces zones-là. Donc, après, s'il y a un reste, on pourra toujours se focaliser sur les zones d'accès difficile, les zones d'insécurité, et puis essayer de servir aussi les sites des déplacés, des réfugiés. Voilà. Merci.
Dr. Orezi, maybe to be more specific for this question, if you had 50% fewer nets, which channels would you prioritize?
Okay, thank you very much. So again, just to give experience from Nigeria, because currently on the Global Fund supported states, we are already doing 70% of the ITNs. And again, even with the 70%, we prioritize places, you know, using data basically to distribute these ITNs. So we target places that really need the ITNs, places, you know, with high transmission, places with poor access to healthcare. But then again, if we have 50% specific, we've said we must not always do a mass campaign. There are several channels in addition to the routine channels that we can leverage on. We can do a targeted community distribution, or we can do a school-based distribution. So those are options that we can use to distribute the nets in place of a mass campaign. But then again, it must not always be a mass campaign. We need to strengthen the continuous distribution system in line with the limited funds and see how we are reaching the people that really need to get and use this nets, not just on the basis of fairness, because we want everybody to get nets, but the basis of who really need this net most, so that we can really prioritize those persons. Thank you.
Thank you all. So for the previous presentations, we saw that it's not only procurement of the nets that will be affected by the funding situation, but also potentially the operational costs. So taking into account those aspects, what will your program do differently over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of anticipation and planning?
Merci, Giovanni. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire différemment? C'est la question.
Oui, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire différemment? Qu'est-ce qu'on va arrêter de faire? Qu'est-ce qu'on va faire peut-être de nouveau qu'on ne faisait pas avant?
Merci. Je dirais ce qu'il faut changer, comme on a commencé par le dire, c'est d'arrêter de voir la couverture universelle pour tout le monde comme un standard. Il faut commencer par dégager les priorités. Comme je l'ai dit, les couches les plus vulnérables, les autres aussi sont venus là-dessus. Mais il va aussi falloir développer de nouvelles capacités. des capacités de fine stratification pour pouvoir, avec beaucoup de rationnel, identifier les points chauds. Il faut aussi revoir les indicateurs. Les indicateurs de couverture universelle, on ne va plus courir derrière ça. Nous allons définir d'autres indicateurs. Ça ne sera plus combien de ménages possèdent au moins une moustiquaire. Ça sera peut-être combien de femmes enceintes on a protégées, combien d'enfants de moins de 5 ans on a protégés, quelle est la population vulnérable protégée. Il faut réviser ces indicateurs. Donc, il y a beaucoup, c'est des choix, je comprends, c'est des choix vraiment difficiles pour les programmes à cette heure-là, mais c'est des choix qui s'imposent. Donc, c'est ce que je pense, Monsieur Giovanni. Merci, je vous retourne la parole.
Yeah, good. Thank you a lot, Dr. Locke. So, Meda, what's your take? What will you start doing? What you stop doing in the next 3 to 5 years as a program?
We are looking at the procurement versus operational costs. I think we have appreciated that with new innovations on the procurement of nets, both PBO to DOI, the price has remained within the manageable angle or range. We have seen it for the mass campaign, we are at around the $2.4, $2.5 per net. The only challenge has remained on the shipment costs and the freight costs. This is also the area we need to review as part of the reviewing the entire budget. Coming to the operational costs, I have hinted on it before that it is possible. I think in the programming perspective, when you are cutting money depending on what is available, look less on reducing the commodity. Don't reduce commodity. Look at how to do innovations on the lower level implementation. The current discussion from the previous days, we have been talking about subnational tailoring. We have been talking about subnational tailoring. How much money do we spend at the national level? You have seen when you are doing a mass campaign, we are buying cars, we are fueling cars to go down. But once, if you put a mechanism that these nets get to the national level, they are straight moved to the lower levels near distribution points. They will remove all of those bureaucratic systems that attract money. You would even reduce on the duration of those nets in the different areas for safety that will minimize the stampeding activities that attract costs. So when we are looking at the operational costs for the reduction, you remember when we started the net distribution, we are using $1 to move nets in a country to the household level. For us as Uganda, we moved from $1, we went to 7 cents, we are now at 4 cents. We used to have 24 days in the field distributing for one wave, a set of districts. Now we are looking at an average of only 12 days. All of these things are out of innovations. But in summary, fund what we call must fund. If you don't fund, you are increasing the risk. Areas of high risk must be compromised or integrated. At the end of the day, you are looking at the accountability for nets and also the coverage to cause the impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Meda. Dr. Kone.
Ok, merci beaucoup pour la question. En parlant de coûts opérationnels, je pense que nous, en tant que programme, nous devons revoir quand même la manière de planification et de mise en œuvre de ces campagnes. La première des choses, peut-être, il va falloir qu'on essaie de sensibiliser les autorités administratives et les leaders communautaires pour leur pleine participation et en même temps pour qu'ils puissent vraiment faire de cette campagne leur sien, l'appropriation de la campagne. Après, par rapport aux activités aussi de planification, nous devons essayer de faire différentes planifications ensemble. C'est-à-dire, cette année au Mali, je pense que nous avons presque gagné le pari. Nous avons fait la micro-planification de la CPS et CDM ensemble en 2026. Tout ça, là, ça va permettre de réduire les coûts. Même en 2025 aussi, nous avons fait la micro-planification virtuellement. Donc, il est important pour nous, en tant que programme, d'essayer de voir tout ce que nous pouvons faire ensemble, faire l'intégration des activités pour une meilleure réalisation. Donc, tout ce que nous pouvons faire aussi en ligne, c'est-à-dire comme les formations en cascade du niveau national et régional, les restitutions de nos résultats, essayer quand même de bénéficier de la technologie qui est l'Internet pour faire beaucoup de choses au lieu d'éjecter plus d'argent aussi à ce niveau. Et nous avons parlé de la diversification aussi des canaux, qui est important pour nous. Il ne faudrait pas qu'en tant que programme, qu'on se base uniquement sur les campagnes pour procurer nos populations de ces moustiquaires-là. Donc, voilà. Sinon, les campagnes peuvent continuer, mais nous devons le faire différemment. Si ça doit se continuer, il faudra le faire, que ce soit des campagnes parcellaires, mais dire que nous allons couvrir toutes nos populations. Vraiment, actuellement, ce n'est plus d'actualité. Voilà, c'est ce que je peux ajouter.
Thank you a lot, Dr. Rezi.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think countries need to start, aligning co-funding with, the realities. Because most times we want the countries to fund some things, but in reality, the funds are not even within this country. And then again, within a country program, it's beyond malaria. They have other health interventions that they also need to provide support to. So again, we need to focus more on how these countries can maybe fund certain things. So for instance, if you look at the logistics components, maybe warehousing, maybe last mile distribution, owning the process, paying attention to how to strengthen, again, some of this routine system, probably taking the shift from maybe wanting countries to start buying nets, rather to shifting to countries to owning some of this process and providing support to these processes that we use for campaigns. So it's just basically having those realistic expectations, not, we want what we want, but what is the reality? Because even within the countries, even within the limited support that we ask for campaign implementation, it's usually a struggle to get, some fundings from this country. But rather, we should try to focus on what these countries can really contribute into owning the process and providing this support to the implementation of activities. So for instance, if they own the process, if you are doing a last mile distribution, it can go beyond the ITNs. You can integrate, the SMC, some other commodities when you are doing their last mile distribution, the routine commodities into those systems. And those things are easily or can be managed within the country. So I think it's, changing the perspective, understanding how, we can shift that focus from wanting the countries to own the entire process, from saying that we can no longer do this. But if we take a little part, the donors can continue to provide support, maybe bulk buying of the commodities, while the countries can even look to operationalizing some of this process. So also having that mind shift in terms of what we really want, what is the realistic things that we demand from the countries and the state government and the local governments to provide support to the bed net distribution or ITN or supports with the strategies for reducing malaria should be where we should focus on, rather than just making it open and all that. So that would be my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe the last question, or the one before the last. So we talk about competing priorities and how we can prioritize, right? But on the other hand, since we know that the external funding is declining and has been declining, and we are not expecting to see any increase to the level we used to have, for sustainability, people have been talking or think about domestic funding or local financing. Do you see any potential or expectation in that regard? How can we tap into local financing or domestic funding to make up for the decline external funding?
Oui, merci Giovanni. Il est évident hein, que dans un contexte comme celui-ci, les pays sont mis à l'épreuve et il y a un effort qui est attendu. L'allocation des ressources domestiques doit connaître une augmentation. Je pense que les pays endémiques doivent prendre conscience de ce que la dépendance à l'aide extérieure est à minimiser de plus en plus. Et pour ça, chaque pays devra travailler pour que le cofinancement national soit progressif. Merci.
Medad.
Domestic financing for sustainability. I think one, we must appreciate that it is possible with the transition plan. If you wake up today, you said like how Ebola came, you would be in the crisis. We have been singing the domestic financing, and the countries are taking it seriously. For example, in Uganda, we are even getting more supplementary budget for health. So considering that we have been having IEVM in Uganda, majorly IRS and ITN, that are donor-driven, the shift needs a very good plan to move. So in this aspect, I think Uganda needs not more than 3 million nets for the routine channels, which the country can afford, on negotiation parameters that as a country, you sustain the continuous distribution for NC, EPI, smart discharge, refugees. Then as the donor also fills the gap as a catch-up for areas we have poor coverage, also sustaining in areas where we have high burden and also malaria transmission. I think it is a two-way. Domestic finance should start, and with an element of sustainability. I think malaria gains are very fragile. So in all the plan that we are taking on a table, whether donor-driven or not donor decision, domestic finance as a country decision must have an element of sustainability. That's why here in Uganda we are doing more of integration. In case HIV is not having money and malaria is having money, the same health workers can be in a position to serve all the patients, all the health facilities. Equally, when you look at the malaria vaccine is under UNEP, but malaria is playing a very big role in supporting UNEP as part of the integration. So the way to sustain the scale and implementation with even additional resources of the government is to make sure there is an integration. If MEDAD is in ITN, can support IRS, can support case management, can also support malaria vaccine and SMC. Thank you.
Thank you. So for Dr. Kone and Dr. Orezi, beyond the government, do you see any role for the private sector to mobilize local financing or domestic financing?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Je pense qu'au-delà du gouvernement, nous devons quand même dégager des stratégies de mobilisation de ressources domestiques, surtout du côté du secteur privé. Ils doivent accompagner les programmes par rapport à l'élimination de cette maladie. Donc, voilà, c'est ça.
Thank you. Dr. Rezi?
Okay, thank you. So I think if we want to really succeed at this, we cannot take out the private sector because, they are going to be very critical, in consideration of the limited fundings that we're currently having. So, but I feel like, earlier engagement with the private sector, clear classification of, what the situation is, and getting everybody's buy-in into the current situation that we have could really help. So yes, I see the private sector as a way to provide support to the current challenges with the limited funding that we're having. And it will also help again to strengthen our systems, we keep relying on donor funding, so we need to come back home. Basically, we need to see what's the resources that we have within. We need to tap into the unlimited resources that we have within our countries. We need to leverage on structures already existing within, our systems. So again, the private sector is very key, and it will be very helpful in providing support to the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the last question is just one thing. What would be one strategic shift that ITN programs must embrace over the next 5 years if we are serious about impact under funding context? One strategic shift, just one.
Merci Giovanni. Je dirais de promouvoir l'équité basée sur le risque en termes de distribution de moustiquaires. Quand les ressources sont vraiment limitées, que de penser à une distribution égalitaire. Merci.
Medad, one strategic shift.
It's a difficult question. One shift. I will just give like 3 shifts. For fairness, I think number one, we have documented in this meeting that we are doing a lot of digitalization. And my observation from the initiation is that our digitalization is more centralized. It is more of the TA than the local capacity. We need to think the method of digitalization. The consultants get on ground, support the district, support countries to have the internal capacity to develop the systems and utilize them moving forward, rather than handling the process remotely. I think it is one of the reasons even why they are having data rights protection units. Then 2, in campaign designs, we have had a lot of consultancies. We need to review how these consultancies are attracting a lot of budgets that are not necessarily translating into results. It is also one of the areas we can also, as part of the shift, to minimize the consultancy, especially have had very, very good benefits between the discussion with MP and the country. They have less time for in-country, but more time for online support. And we have had heavy savings of their support, especially giving priority for the areas that should not be funded. In the discussion with Zanda, we looked at logistics tools. We discovered that we can go away with the good received notes, maintain stock cards and the way bill, and we're in position to track the commodity up to last level. These are the areas we need to do, despite the physical, but we can also have online TA support. Then lastly, I think that the last one, we have distributed these nets, but with minimal impact. We need to rethink on how to support the civil society organizations and the community-based organizations. Because they are already in the community, they know community problems. Get nets there, for us to achieve the impact, we need to have access. So if you have nets available in the community and you engage these CSOs, they don't attract per diem, they don't attract, they have only small money to buy water like what we are having here. You will have results with very good accountability. Thank you.
Dr. Kone.
Merci beaucoup. Peut-être que je vais faire comme lui. Voilà, par rapport au changement stratégique, je pense que la première des choses, d'abord, il faut faire l'intégration des activités, c'est-à-dire faire la campagne MILDA avec la CPS, SIAN, les distributions, les autres activités de santé de masse. Donc, après l'intégration, il faudra qu'on commence quand même à laisser les leaders communautaires, les autorités administratives et leaders communautaires à gérer les campagnes à leur niveau. Et essayer aussi de faire la distribution sans coût. Parce que s'ils sont impliqués, ils peuvent faire la distribution sans coût pour nous. Sinon, dans le cas échéant, faire la dénombrement et distribution ensemble. Voilà. Donc, c'est les 3 propositions que je voulais ajouter. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Kone. Enfin, Dr. Rezi.
Ok, Okay, so for me, one strategic shift will be, we need to start making more investments in our routine systems and our continuous distribution systems because, again, our funds are declining. These systems are already existing. So basically, it's just looking for a way to strengthen them, tap into them, refine them, and use them as, a support to our ITN mass campaign distribution. So that would be what I would suggest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all the panelists. So what I'm getting in terms of conclusion here, three realities. The first, that trade-offs are unavoidable as we move forward. Trade-offs are unavoidable. Second is prioritization within the equity with intensity. And the third one is sustainability with system strengthening. We talk about digitalization. So finally, the funding context is a challenge, but it's not a risk, right? You have showed us that there is an opportunity, right? And the issue is adaptation. We need to start now, think about adaptation as we move into the grant making process. So it's not time to complain and to lament, but to strategize and think forward and anticipate and how we can turn these constraints and challenges into opportunities. So thank you for the panelists. A big clap to them. Back to the facilitator.
Good. I would like to thank the moderator for the afternoon session, Nueza from UNDP. Thank you very much for the moderation. And to the final panel. So just a few quick announcements. We'll start tomorrow morning. It's our last day at 9 o'clock in this room, and it's a shorter day. So we finish at 1:30 tomorrow. I'm just encouraging people, if you didn't get a chance to complete the survey of day 1 and day 2, could you try and do that this evening? It was sent to you via an email. And then in addition, this evening you'll get another email which will give you details on the departure info from the hotel, so shuttles to the airport. So you'll get that later tonight. And then finally, there is a conference dinner at the poolside this evening. So it starts at 6:30, and it's a dinner both for the SMC team and the AMP team. So as you exit, if you look down, you can see it's all set up beside the pool. So that dinner starts at 6:30. So we'll see everyone tomorrow morning at 9 in this room. Thank you very much.